Good afternoon, councillors. It is 1:04 p.m. Welcome to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee meeting 819. We've got an apology today from Councillor Darren Taylor, if somebody's happy to move that. Moved Councillor Caldwell, seconded
Councillor Patterson.
Councillor Patterson. All those in favour? That's carried. Confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting. Yeah, moved Councillor Owen Jones, seconded myself. All those in favour? That's carried. We've got no notification of conflicts of interest today, councillors. So, did we have any from the floor? All right. I'd like to welcome all of our member councillors, as well as Councillor Gail O'Neill, Councillor Mark Hamill and Councillor Ryan Baldwin Lumsden for attending today. Well, your name's on the list for being a member. Okay, and a warm welcome to our Deputy Mayor, Dr. Councillor Donna Gates. Okay. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 starred items, councillors. Did we want to unstar any of those? 6.2 and Councillor Peter Young, you're moving 5.1, 6.1 and 6.4. All those in favour? Oh no, seconder, sorry. Seconder will go with Councillor Caldwell. All those in favour? That's carried. So 5.1 is moved, 6.1 is moved and 6.4. So we'll go to Councillor Owen Jones, 6.2, Beach Health Report.
Thank you. And it's exciting to see that our beaches are in a healthy position. Director, on page 54, there's the beach widths, and Narrowneck and Main Beach are the areas that are maybe, my reading of it, maybe where action could be required. And my fundamental question is the sand back pass, will that help improve those sections?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely, Councillor Owen Jones. The Sand Backpass project in the northern part of the city has been designed specifically to bring additional sand into those beaches which have the lowest beach profile and are most vulnerable, as picked up in this section of the report. So that will be a mitigation measure.
And does that also, is the majority of the, I'm going to say the red for the profile volume on the next page is also in that similar type of area and, right, again, usable beach width. So is that a one long campaign to divert the sand, or do we need to be mindful of what it does for South Stradbroke?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we do need to be very mindful of what we do to South Stradbroke. So there's already a sand push to South Straddy, but this will pull additional sand, which is available from the Broadwater through to Narrowneck Surfers main beach area in a series of concerted campaigns over time. So it won't be a massive hit. It'll be as required. The team will continue to monitor the beaches as they do on a monthly basis, and we'll be able to effectively pulse sand through the system at the critical times to build up the beach so that we can prevent that erosion through longshore drift to the north.
Okay, thank you. That was all. Happy to move it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While Darren's making his way over to the table, just a bit of context, as you'll recall. We conducted a trial of a beach club in the Currawong area. This report is a report back to committee and council on how that trial went and proposes a way forward. So, Darren, you want to take it from there?
Is that on? Did you want me to talk through the report, Elton, or through Madam Chair, or just take questions? Okay, thank you. So, as Elton outlined, obviously the purpose of the trial was actually obviously to undertake the trial, but also during the trial we collected community consultation. We also had feedback from key events stakeholders as well, so that's internal council officers, but also external groups as well, like Office of the Liquor, Gaming and Regulation. In terms of the trial, it was run from the 1st of December till the 14th of March. There was an extension to that for 6 weeks from the end of January to the 14th of March, and that was done under an exception. To actually undertake the trial, there was 3 issues that the city needed to step through. The first one was tenure. Tenure was dealing with the state government through Department of Natural Resources and Mines to actually, because we're using a inconsistent use in a park reserve. So under that, the Department of Natural Resources said they were happy for the council to proceed based on a trial, but they expected if a future application was to go ahead for a longer beach club, then we would have to do a land management plan. The second issue was planning. Because the use was temporary, less than 28 days in a calendar year, we did not need to submit an MCU. So that was a temporary use under the planning scheme. For the 6 weeks extension, we did that under an exception certificate under section 46, and Roger can talk about that if required. In terms of operational works, because the beach club trial can actually be bumped in and bumped out, the operational works was not required. They considered that minor works. And then the actual permit to the operator was issued under the local laws 9 and 10. In terms of the community consultation, it ran from the 1st of December until the 21st of March 2022. There was, as set out in the report, just let me get to that. There was 44,820 visitors to the beach club. There was 2,741 community survey participants, and the survey was actually, I guess, promoted through a number of engagement exercises, one being our project webpage. The other one was through Australia Venue Co's Beach Club webpage and their website. Social media campaigns, so we actually did push through social media, through payments and things like that for people to fill out the survey. There was a postcard, and that was delivered to a number of residences around the site as well. There were stakeholder emails, there was face-to-face engagement, and also the City of Gold Coast did some targeted face-to-face engagement as well. So it was extensively promoted. There was 31 business survey participants. 69% of the community that actually went to the beach club said they had a positive experience. 74% of the business survey respondents had a positive experience, and many would like to see it as a permanent concept throughout the year. In terms of actual support for the beach club, 57% of the community survey respondents think the Gold Coast should have a beach club. The main feedback that came through the community survey, and also from the letters that actually came into Councillor Taylor and to the Mayor and into the City, was themes around environmental impacts, safety and inappropriate location for alcohol service, loss of public amenity, aesthetics, and a lot of that was to do with the back of the house, the fencing, and a lot of the residences in the high-rise looking down on the actual beach club complained about or gave feedback about the actual containers, that they were rusty on top. The other one was there was concerns about impacts to local businesses, but specifically, obviously, to the Currawong Surf Lifesaving Club. The feedback that came from the internal event management group which was run through city events, and that was the normal process for any city event, was around waste management. Obviously, with the trial was actually put in place very quickly. There wasn't any appropriate waste management and bins getting washed out and things like that, so there was a bit of feedback around that. The temporary fencing, just the way it was located, its interface with the public, but also with the footpath. Lifeguard Services also acknowledged that if there was to be, this is a continuing event, that there should be lifeguard services for those days or those events where there's, at capacity, things like New Year's Eve and things like that outside of the flagged area time. Again, the back of house temporary infrastructure was raised, and that was from the environmental health officers more concerned about storage of food, storage of the implementations to serve food. And the other feedback was events that are already approved on the site. Most of those were managed very effectively by city events. And the social beach volleyball, that was impacted as well. We got 4 courts by moving the courts to the south. But the feedback was obviously there was still a social volleyball impact because normally they have a considerable amount of more courts. In terms of the way forward, should council wish to actually progress a beach club at this location, we've recommended that the trial continue in its current form to collect community feedback. So we've got a baseline now, and obviously there was some improvements noted. If we are to continue the beach club, there's actually the 3 things we need to consider: the tenure, the planning, and then the local laws. And there's advice in the report around that. At the moment, there is some legislation that's getting passed around what's called trustee permits, and Andrew can talk more about that if required. Then we would have to do a development application. The reason we need to do a development application is we're beyond the 28 days temporary use in the planning scheme if we do a 3-year, 6-month trial. In terms of the local law permit required, that's something that the city still needs to work to, whether we would condition the operators under local laws. We would typically do it through the trustee permit if that passes through legislation that's coming through the state government. The other thing to note is the city has procured a planning agency to actually lodge the DA that's required. It would be a hotel use DA. It would be impact accessible. At this stage, that planner is also giving advice on what improvements we could do to the site to address the community concerns, and that will feed through the MCU process as well back to council. In terms of the operator, obviously we did have Australia Venue Cove for the trial. It's the advice of procurement that we would actually go back to the market again around the operator, because obviously if we continue to 3-year, 6 months per annum, it would be a lot more attractive to the market, and we would want to actually test the market to get the best outcome for the city. The other things around rent, bond and all those things would need to come back to council for consideration. Happy to take questions.
So in regards to the feedback, did we receive specific feedback from Kurrawa Surf Lifesaving Club?
Kurrawa Surf Club did not give feedback in writing specifically to us, but I know the council had a lot of conversations with Kurrawa Surf Club. We did meet down on site a few times when we were rejigging the volleyball courts and things like that, but no direct feedback.
And were they approached specifically? Because clearly some of the community feedback has been, we have surf lifesaving clubs, and there's one right there, and this is in conflict or competition with it. So I was just interested if...
No feedback from the Kurrawa Surf Lifesaving Club.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. First of all, I have a few concerns with the methodology we used for the research. First of all, the images on the documentation that was sent out, would you like it, certainly look very attractive, very nice and shiny, and nothing like what was my experience when I went there. There's no accurate images of how it blocks off the horizon of the city, of the beach, as you know, this very special part of our beach that you come up to. So there was a pretty one-sided approach on our social media engagement. I'm also very concerned that so much of it was activated via the operator themselves, who so very clearly have a vested interest. I have a couple of questions on that. So the first one is regarding the stat on the businesses surveyed.
Yes.
So supposedly the majority of the businesses around there who were surveyed said that they would like it, but it's only 31. And what I noted out of that 31 is they also said they were very interested in partnering with the venue.
Yeah.
So do you not see a concern with businesses who see that if they kind of make a pitch now that they may get to be a partner in a trial, and a very select group who get to say that there may be a vested interest again in that business group suggesting that they're actually supportive of it?
So was there two questions there, sorry, through the chair?
So with that business survey stat,
Yes.
we're meant to believe that that 31 businesses that were surveyed
Yes.
gives us an indication of what those small businesses think.
Yep.
But when you read through the data, it also says that the majority of those ones that did respond said they're also interested in partnering with the trial. So of course they are. There's a financial benefit to them. So do you not see that there's an issue with that methodology when you're getting feedback from people who actually want to get a partnership and get some benefit out of it? Because clearly not every small business there can have a partnership with them. Yeah, so that's my question.
So in terms of the number, yes, the 31, it's disappointing. I can say that through the city economy email list, that we did go through that as well, and we also Grounded Consulting, who were the consultation consultant that we put on, did walk through all of Broadbeach, but obviously it's very difficult to actually get the owners of the particular business as well to actually to give that feedback. But Councillor, I take what you're saying. If that was the trial was to continue, then that's something that the council could consider in terms of either getting the operator to provide those opportunities or not provide those opportunities. I guess it was just a general question that was derived that we were seeking from, businesses. And it was probably at the time more around, boutique breweries or anything like that supplying, those kind of things. It was a very direct question around that particular kind of opportunity. And it was to test if there were any other opportunities that would come from the business community as well.
Yeah, so my point there, and I think you've kind of pointed to it, is that I'd assert that result that we got from them is skewed because it's for people who are going to get a financial benefit.
True.
Could you please share in your words, what do you think is the underlying intent of why we're considering this? Why are we considering a beach club?
So through the chair, obviously this came from a Merrill Minute to obviously look at an opportunity to increase our tourism offering on the Gold Coast and to test whether a beach club would be acceptable to the community.
Okay, so it's to make us more attractive. So could you say that again? What is the underlying intent of us doing this?
So through the chair, from the Merrill Minute, which what it was to offer an alternative tourism opportunity on the Gold Coast that we currently do not have, and to test an actual beach club opportunity.
Okay, with the intent that that alternative will bring more benefit to our economy as a whole. Okay, so I understood that was the case. So I'm curious when I read in the research that you've provided us,
Yes.
that of the people who've attended, so would you think that these stats that you've done reflect that? Because as far as I'm concerned, that these stats would suggest it's a reason why not to continue. 56% of the people who did attend said that they would not attend another business in Broadbeach that day. So we have, and then to follow it up, hang on, I'll get the stats for this, but the majority of those people said they would have had visited Broadbeach anyway if it wasn't operational. So we have effectively taken, wouldn't that suggest that we're taking business away from small businesses? Because they've told us that they didn't attend anywhere else that day, and if the beach club wasn't there, they would have attended Broadbeach anyway, and they would have gone to a small business who's doing this anyway. So
through the chair, I guess the answer to that question is obviously the operator did rely a lot on local visitation in this particular case, because during that period, as everyone knows, there were very much border closures and COVID lockdowns. It's very difficult for me to say that, you know, if we had if we had interstate or national or international visitation, those numbers might be different. But that's the reason for baselining this information and continuing as a trial.
okay. I've got two other questions.
Yeah, and just a little bit of feedback on that is that I think if you're going to an event, like if you're going to a wedding or you're going to a birthday or you're going to a function, you go to the event, you choose to enjoy that event, and then you choose to go home. So it could be skewed in the other direction too. This is an offering that people have chosen to meet a group of friends there, and then they depart and go back. Are they going to go clothes shopping at the time? Are they going to go into a shoe shop? Are they going to go and do their Woolworths grocery shopping? No, they're not, because they've attended an event that they chose to meet friends at and then they left. So I think we actually have to look at the balance on both sides. I understand what you're saying, but also the other alternative is that if you are choosing to meet people at a function, you don't necessarily go and do those other things on the way home. And also for the other businesses in the area that have given the feedback there, would they have gone to Broadbeach at any one time if there hadn't been a beach club? Well, then, yes, they do go into Broadbeach for other things. This is an additional offering, as in the Mayor indicated, it's an additional offering to
I hear that. I get that.
economy.
But your comment goes to that first question, that, okay, I wouldn't have visited it anyway. And if that was the only data we got back, maybe. But then we got additional data that said, I would have gone to Broadbeach anyway, even if this wasn't here. So we are definitely taking business away from the small businesses. The other stat, which you didn't happen to mention today, is that of the people who did not visit, who evidently represent 98%, if we're going to take this data as reflective of our community, well, they're representing 99% of our population. 64% of them are not supportive of the beach trial. So I just note that you didn't happen to mention that in the opening remarks. Can I just confirm that that's correct?
So 57% of the community survey responded that they think that the Gold Coast should have a beach club, so that's the 57%.
Yes.
The 43% is obviously the ones that said no.
Yes.
In terms of visitation, so of the total survey size, 1,512 visited and 1,239 did not visit.
Yes, and of those ones that didn't visit,
Yeah.
64% of them have told us they're not supportive. Well, maybe they're not informed, but you don't have to go, if you know that this is not something that you're interested in for your city, you don't have to go to it and visit it to know that you're not. So my concern here is we're meant to be taking all this research as the reason for extending this, and all the research, as far as I'm concerned, points to consistently why this isn't a good idea. But anyway, okay, they're my questions for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to provide some context around my questions, because they touch on different facets to the report than Councillor Patterson, but I just want to clear up, I suppose, my thinking so that my questions are properly taken. Madam Chair, for those who attended the Lifestyle and Community Committee meeting this morning, we extended a trial for a skydive business operating at the Spit. And one of the reasons why we made the decision to extend that trial is because 12 months worth of trading in difficult conditions, both from a weather and border and pandemic perspective, actually did not afford that operator an opportunity to generate the sort of data that we might require in order to make a fully informed decision. So I totally respect that Councillor Patterson feels as though the data does not support an extension, but I actually feel as though the data hasn't done its job to paint a full picture. So when I consider whether or not to support an extension of the trial, for me, it's less about the merit of a beach bar, but more about making a fully informed decision that has more information. Now, we've already acknowledged, and we've heard this from Councillor Patterson when she made her point, that we've had a dearth of responses from some sections. Now, the best way to address a dearth of responses and to get more data to make a fully informed position is to consult more. And I think it's really important that when we do consult people, we give them an opportunity to see, feel, touch the product themselves. Because if they don't, then they're not making a fully informed decision. And it becomes more of a ideological decision rather than one grounded in practical reality. And I think given the regulatory overlay that sort of sits over this proposal, it's really important that people get to feel, see, touch and experience before they make a decision. Now, on the issue to do with, and I appreciate it's not debate, but I just want to couch my questions. On the issue of economic impact, I think we cannot ignore the fact that our city's tourism industry was on its knees. We cannot ignore that. And if we had to survey any business that was trading during that period, I'm sure they would have thrown up remarkably similar results. When I think about the authority that we might look to in order to understand economic impact, that would have to be Destination Gold Coast. It's our destination marketing organisation. And when I look to the leadership of Destination Gold Coast, who are plugged into a membership of in excess of 400 Gold Coast tourism businesses, they come out quite strongly in favour of the continuation of this trial. So we might have had 37 responses through the council survey, but the peak industry body has got behind this. And when we have a look at the Play the Day Away campaign, which was recently launched by Destination Gold Coast, a big feature of that was the Burleigh Pavilion. Now, a lot of people talk about the Burleigh Pavilion using the same language as this particular beach bar, and yet it is such an attraction that it becomes the focal point of our whole tourism campaign. So I suppose the point I'm making in providing this context is that there can be an economic impact in the medium and long term in terms of building our reputation as a city with new things on offer, far beyond what might have gone through the tills during a troubled trading period. That all being said, I actually do have some significant concerns with the officer recommendation. So I'm notionally supportive of a trial, but I have concerns about what's been said today in terms of what the process looks like and whether or not that's actually been reflected in the officer's recommendation. So, for example, we've heard today that in order to have any permanency around this trial, a development application is required to be lodged. And we've heard that that will come back to council. But we also have a recommendation which reads in part 3 that the Chief Executive Officer is authorised to make a development application for a material change of use for a beach club use and any related uses on Kurrawa Terrace and do all things necessary or desirable to progress the application. And I just wonder whether there's a circumstance where the CEO may do everything within his power and everything that he may deem desirable to progress and approve a development application outside the assessment of the responsible committee and ultimately council. So my question is, how do we reconcile an undertaking that this will come back to council with part 3 of the recommendation, which talks about the CEO having complete carriage over the process.
Through you, Madam Chair, apologies for my attire. I'm a late call-in. In relation to point 3, Councillor Vorster, that only authorises the CEO to make an application. It certainly doesn't authorise the CEO to decide the application.
But the CEO has an inherent delegation to approve it.
Because that is caught under the all things necessary and all things desirable. So what would prevent the CEO using his delegation to secure an approval because he may feel it's desirable?
Through you, Madam Chair, we treat this application just like any other application that we receive. We have policies for impact assessment applications where there are submissions, where we liaise with the divisional councillor whether that item will be forwarded to the City Planning Committee or not.
So, Madam Chair, if I can just make this point on the back of my questions, I think that's a deficiency in the officer recommendation because we're talking about new ground for the city, something that stokes significant community interest and tension and deserves the scrutiny of a committee and full council. And I'm very concerned that the recommendation does not refer an eventual development application back to committee. And I think if we arrive at a position collectively that this is worth supporting, that DA must come back to us, so there'll need to be a change. That's my first question. My second question, Madam Chair, again pertains to part 3. And it talks about a material change of use for a beach club use and any related uses. So I understand conceptually what a beach club is, and I wouldn't have put it under a hotel definition, by the way. I'm not sure what the correct language is or planning or land use is, but I understand what a beach club is. But what are related uses that may form part of an application?
So through the chair, the reason for the related uses was that we wanted to hoover up any other, it could be kids pantomime or anything like that, that we would reasonably expect to be happening on the Kurrawa Terrace in that space. Right. So it was more to not preclude anything rather than exclude anything. So that was the reason for that statement. So we actually did a conversation with Destination Gold Coast, with Major Events Gold Coast, to actually consider all the other uses, because we didn't want to limit by actually going down the hotel use that you know we would not be able to have those types of events. So,
Madam Chair, through you to Darren, I'm going to ask you to excuse me for a moment, not from the room, but I suppose missed the section of the report that deals with some of these other potential uses that may be included in this development application. Can you point me to the page in the report or section that deals with these other uses? Because I missed it, and it could be that they're not listed.
Through the chair, you are correct, Councillor. They are not listed in the report.
And that was a genuine question, by the way. It wasn't a set-up or a stitch-up. And I suppose, Madam Chair, the point I'm going to make with part 3 is that it is... Sorry, is it there, William?
That have a variety of uses.
Right. Okay, so
I'm not saying it's part of the... I think it leads to...
Yeah, so I just think... particularly if there is no direction that this development application come back through council, I think it is highly risky for the council, this is my personal view, for the council to authorise the CEO to potentially tack on any other related uses which may support a beach club trial. Children's pantomime, I mean, I would never have put children's pantomime in the same orbit as a hotel use. So it would have been good to get some clarity in the report around what the scope of those uses might be. Madam Chair. Darren?
So through the chair, it's not necessarily those uses happening at the same time as the beach club, just to be clear. It could be a car launch or, you know those other examples. We just didn't want to miss them.
I get it. And I suppose my concern, Madam Chair, through you to Darren, is that a development approval doesn't evaporate when an operator disappears, right? It's tied in perpetuity really to the land. So we have an opportunity today to support an extension of a beach trial, which will trigger a development application. But it will actually indelibly change the way that this corner of Broadbeach is used. So we need to have a laser-like focus on what this development application is, because if it is progressed and supported, to unscramble the egg will be all but impossible. And I just would have hoped and expected that that would have been a little bit clearer in the report, because for me it just induces too much risk. Madam Chair, my next question deals with recommendation part 5. And it reads that the Chief Executive Officer investigate options for the appointment of an experienced beach club operator to operate and manage the beach club for the continued trial period. So again, in the earlier contribution, we heard that procurement has advised that we are best to go to market. And I'm all for that, by the way, because I think the value proposition to a market participant for a 3-year trial is much more attractive than a single year, and will probably prompt the sort of investment that's required in order to make the best of the space. So going to market for a new 3-year offering, I think is the prudent course. But again, that wasn't captured in part 5. And I wonder if we're open to other land uses, why, I suppose actually my simplest question is, why have we sought to limit the respondents to only those who are experienced beach club operators? And do we have a sense of how large the potential pool of market respondents might be? Because I'm assuming procurement for issues of probity and ratepayer interest have talked about a fresh market-led approach. I wonder whether by council constraining the market responses to only the experienced operators, we're perhaps undermining some of the feedback that may have been received by procurement. So the simple question is, why is it necessary to limit this to experienced beach operators, and how many responses could we expect to see?
So through the chair, for the trial, we had 5 operators put in to have the opportunity to lodge an event application. I would imagine that it would be higher than 5 for obviously the longer period of time. In terms of experience, there's a number of things around the experience. Obviously, with liquor licensing and things like that, that's the capability of them to handle those, even having a portable liquor licence and the capability to utilise those things. That is more around their capability and experience, which would be the criteria for, you know, when we did go to market.
So, and I totally get that. That would be a sensible assessment framework for an officer to take, or the CEO to take, when deciding amongst a number of submissions. But the way I read 5 is it actually constrains the amount of constrains the number of conforming submissions that we might receive. So my question is, how many beach club operators are there in this nation?
Through the chair, so for the trial again with the 5 operators, a number of them were actually food and beverage restaurateurs on the Gold Coast as well. So
yeah, but it doesn't say experienced restaurateurs. It says the appointment of an experienced beach club operator. It doesn't say restaurateur. It doesn't talk about a hospitality business. I suppose my concern is there's maybe 1 or 2 businesses that can tick these boxes, and procurement's telling us to take a market-led approach, but we're constraining the number of responses, and therefore not being as competitive as we might need to be in order to secure the best public realm and community sort of outcome. So follow-up question, Madam Chair, through you is, what's the genesis of constraining the responses to experienced beach club operators and not opening it up to the broader sector as was the case when the trial was first mooted?
Through the chair, I think the recommendation would be just to change that to food and beverage operator, and then you'll broaden that opportunity, to be clear.
Yeah, so, Madam Chair, I've got some notes very far away from, I suppose, potential amendments, but I'm encouraged to hear that that line of questioning has at least injected a bit of competitive tension into the process. Could I ask, in terms of the community consultation, Councillor Patterson's raised some concerns that I don't necessarily share, but do you think that, or what would community consultation look like over the next 3 years if this were to be supported? What would we repeat? Because I suppose you've talked about now we've got a baseline. Are we now constrained to asking the same set of questions in year 2, 3 and 4 in order to measure trend? Or do we have an opportunity, if we adopt the recommendations of this report, to rethink what some of those questions are and the way that people are engaged moving forward?
Through the chair, absolutely. The feedback from the survey respondents was actually the survey was quite long.
Yes.
And long to fill out. So there could be opportunities to provide different survey mechanisms to capture more information or less information, depending on how the particular participant in the survey wanted to provide that information.
And Madam Chair, just lastly, so on the community consultation, I think it's important that we have an independent, accredited, IAP2 accredited firm carry out this work, appointed by council, but at the expense of the operator. I think that's important. But just on the trial, I mean, my sense of a trial is it's effectively a proof of concept. It's an opportunity to gather data to then make an ultimate decision. So I'm interested in whether we've got the right approach to support that trial. And I wonder, are there any other planning instruments where temporary land use rights can be granted that do not have permanency? In other words, is there a mechanism to grant this land use over this parcel for the next 3 to 5 years rather than indefinitely?
Through you, Madam Chair, this operation is a bit different from a skydiving operation, sure, which sort of has 1 or 2 people involved. This is a fairly large project. It had 48,000 people over the trial period, so it is a material change of use. We have a temporary use definition that runs for 28 days in any calendar year. So in answer to your question, we're a bit stuck. If we exceed the 28 days in any calendar year, it's not a temporary use. Okay. There is one exception, our exemption certificate. We stretched the temporary use via the exemption certificate because of inclement weather, but also to get more data on the trial. So we thought 6 weeks was actually appropriate. We couldn't use an exemption certificate for 3 years. That wouldn't be acting reasonably at all.
Sure, and Madam Chair, just for the sake of those tuning in the gallery, I'm not proposing that we stretch an exemption. I just know that under Robina's planning legislation, for example, there is an opportunity to grant a temporary land use over a parcel for 3 years. That does not then grant enduring land rights. I just thought there might have been something else in the planning scheme. And lastly, Madam Chair, the purpose of a trial, again, for me, is to establish a proof of concept, collect the data, make a final decision. To what extent can we expect or be required to assess and approve any other application for a beach club trial or product along our coast over the next 3 years? Because I would suggest if this was a genuine trial, that there be no others. Can I get some feedback on that?
Yeah, a planning response to that is every application should be assessed on its merits and just in line with the city plan. Through a planning perspective, I can't say that this is the only trial that we should allow. Every application should be treated equally.
So, Madam Chair, sorry, just through you to Roger, if I may. My understanding is that in order to lodge a development application, you require owner's consent. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, correct.
But council could resolve not to provide any further owner's consent.
Through you, Madam Chair, it was the state government that provided owner's consent for the making of the temporary use application.
But who was the applicant? We were.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's a hard one. I actually think the operator might have been the applicant for the temporary use.
So they made an application under the local laws 9 and 10 for an event permit.
Yes. So, and I suppose, sorry, the existing operator used a mechanism that's not fit for purpose, which is why we're now talking about the planning scheme. I just, one of the things that makes me very cautious about supporting this recommendation is that it does little to firm up council's view, that I think it's council's view, that this is a trial and that we want the trial to make or break the case before we entertain an additional expansion. And I know, for example, I think the original motion talked about there being one at the Spit, right? I think we looked at 2 locations originally. I could be wrong. Director, is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, we did look at a number of locations and one of them was there.
So I suppose because there's this other motion that's in the ether, I'm not sure whether that becomes a potential site for someone else, another competitor, an unsuccessful market respondent to try and set up shop. And I just worry that we're going to end up in a position where we actually don't have a genuine trial progressing, but we actually have the launch of a formalised process to accept applications for beach clubs right across the coast, with little ability to push back on the market and say no until we've resolved our policy position. Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I just have a question that follows from Councillor Forster. Are you imagining that we make it clear in a recommendation that a pilot is for one, as opposed to the city supporting during the pilot period any further sites?
Because for me, yes, because the beach trial for me is about collecting data in order to make a policy, to form a policy position. And it would make no sense to me to confuse that process with any additional beach clubs until we have a clean run with this one. So I wouldn't support others popping up until we've concluded this trial. If that answers your question.
So
I think if we resolve that, it would be ultra-virus. To borrow another famous phrase, I just don't think it would be enforceable. Because if another applicant came in and got state government approval, we would be compelled to receive that application and decide it. So I think it's too, like, that might be how we feel about it, but I just don't think we could resolve it.
And Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Caldwell, that might be the case, and I accept that it is. I was labouring under the assumption that there may have been an earlier role for us, particularly when we're talking about the park, for example, to provide owner's consent when our land is affected. And that may have been our mechanism to frustrate additional applications by not providing that consent at the time that it's lodged. Yeah.
and just through to you, Cameron, if you, Herman, if you were to say in recommendation number 2 there, if you change like the continuation of an exclusive beach club trial, meaning exclusive to that area, and this, is it again putting us in muddy waters?
I mean, it's all about the interpretation of the words, which Councillor Vorster has talked about a lot. And what does exclusive in that context mean? The CEO might read it and go, well, my interpretation of that, or whoever's reading it in his office says, that's one single operator is exclusive in this location.
Yep.
I don't think it's going to get us anywhere.
It won't give it any more meat to it. Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to go to Councillor Peter Young first. He's been waiting, and then I'll go to Councillor O'Neill. Thanks, Peter, for your patience.
Thanks, Chair.
Take me on the list when you're ready.
Yeah.
I'll preempt my engagement by not making a declarable conflict, but by alerting councillors to the fact that I am a life member of Gecko, and my understanding is Gecko have made a submission or a letter has been written to all councillors. I have not received it as such. I know it exists. So my comments will be my own, but if any councillor has a concern with that, I'm not making a declarable conflict, as I said. My questions begin with the trial period before us. It's recommended that it's 3 years. Through your chair, how is the 3 years decided and not 2 years or 1? Noting that the original trial was 12 weeks.
So through the chair, the 3 years and 6 months per annum is a suggested trial period, and the duration during the calendar year. That was something. The reason why we're seeking that is because obviously we do need to lodge a DA. The trustee permit process allows for up to 3 years that the permit's valid for, but it can be a decision for council to do less than 3 years.
So theoretically, it could be 1 year.
That's correct.
Because it's a trial, and it still gives us the opportunity to gather that data that will inform our future decisions. Thanks,
So
Chair.
through the chair, the reason for the 3 years is obviously the considerable investment made by the operator. And if we wanted to put more in, we thought that it would be better to give them a longer period of time.
Thank you. And that's more or less leading to my next question, which was about the cost. Do we know the cost of this trial to the public to date, and what the expected cost of this, say, 3-year trial would be to the public, noting that you've told us a planner has been engaged and obviously we've undertaken...
Sorry, Madam Chair. Could I just flag that may be confidential, because this was decided, if you read the report, that was considered as part of our budget deliberations, and that information's not yet publicly available. We dealt with a similar issue in our Lifestyle and Community Committee this morning when looking at the Mudgeeraba cemetery regeneration. So we were able to ask questions that didn't touch on financial matters, but until such time as the budget's adopted, it's confidential. I just thought I'd...
That's a fair point, Chair. I'll reframe my question. Do we know what the cost of the trial to date has been, and what a ballpark figure might be, what an estimate might be for the future cost, rather than a budget-specific cost? Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. So through the chair, for the public cost, so the public cost was obviously the council officer time to run the procurement process, the trial, and have the meetings and things like that, and prepare the report. In terms of the consultation piece, it was circa $40,000 for the grounded consulting to run the survey piece, the cost for all the social media and things like that. So that was the public cost. In terms of the commercial cost to the operator, we don't have those figures, but circa $500,000 to actually install and bump in and bump out the event, and then there's obviously staff costs on all of that as well.
Thank you. And so further to that, if you don't mind, Chair, what's the income been to the council for that trial from the proponent?
So in terms of fees for the Kurrawa Terrace under the trial, we waived the fees.
Okay.
But there was a bond for the Australia Venue Code to actually come back in and, do any turfing or anything like that for impacts like any other event would do.
Thank you. So there's been a net cost of the trial, which is probably what was anticipated. What is the ballpark anticipation for a 3-year trial in the future?
Through the chair, so obviously the cost would be the development application and the planning consultant. There was also a discussion piece in the report around if council wanted to actually undertake any infrastructure works to the site to give a better outcome, not only for the beach club operation, but also for any other events that we do there, because that was actually why we did do the community consultation to seek that piece of what improvements are required to the site. But that's a future decision from council if they want to actually undertake those works. And then obviously the other thing would be, is there a rent or some kind of fee that's passed on to the operator for that space? So the beach club did not have any charge to enter the beach club, and that was part of that space is available, or the community has direct access into there. At most times they did have like New Year's Eve events where there was a cover charge, and the cabanas there was a cover charge as well, but actually anyone could go into that space and recreate for free of charge.
Thanks, Chair. A couple more questions, if you don't mind. Just to be completely clear, my understanding is that the Department of Resources is the landowner of the entire affected site.
Through the chair, so yes, and obviously we're trustee for the Park Reserve.
And has there been some kind of legal analysis of the recommendations before us? Because it appears to me that items 3 and 6, there's a conflict, there's a strong tension whereby the CEO is instructed to make an application and to approve it.
Through the chair, so I guess in terms of 3, it was written in terms of progressing the application. I'd actually take a different to actually approving the application, but
No,
happy
3
for
is
those
about-
words to be stripped out if as Councillor Vorster has already discussed.
I'm busy typing.
But 3, if I might, Chair, 3 is about making the application. 6 is about facilitating the implementation, that is to make it happen. It's pretty clear. You're the CEO. You've got 2 jobs here: make the application and get it approved. That's it. And we wash our hands of it. That's how I read that. Am I wrong?
Yeah, as well as agreements, permits.
Yes. Anything desirable.
So we could never see this ever again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Through the chair, I'm happy for
Which we might need to fix.
number 6 to be removed as well, because obviously we'd still be lodging.
Remove 6.
Happy for number 6 to be removed.
That was exactly what I was going to suggest, and I think that is a massive change, but I think it's good.
So I'm trying to collate all the things
Thanks,
that we've said
Chair.
and change recommendation.
Is that okay?
All right, Councillor Caldwell, I'm going to go to Councillor O'Neill next, back to you and then back to Councillor Gates.
I have just a couple of questions. Thanks, Chair. Just on page 80, which are the results, the executive summary of the results, a couple of questions that were asked. Would you visit beach clubs in other Gold Coast locations in the future? Would you visit beach clubs in other Gold Coast locations in the future if current COVID-19 restrictions allow? Seeing this was a survey about a trial period at Kurrawa Beach, can I just ask why those questions were included? That's number 1 question.
Through the chair, sorry, what page was that?
Page 80.
80, sorry.
That's on the engagement report on the Kurrawa Beach trial. This gives a snapshot of the executive summary.
Sorry, through the chair, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Just on page 80 on the executive summary of the actual trial, the survey results, it says, would you visit beach clubs in other Gold Coast locations in the future? 73% said yes, 27% said no. And then there was another question, would you visit beach clubs in other Gold Coast locations in the future if current COVID-19 restrictions allow? 64% said no, 36% said yes. I just wondered why those questions were included when we were talking about a trial at Kurrawa Beach.
Through the chair, so given it was a trial, we were testing if the community was open to other locations, and it might not be at Kurrawa Terrace. Obviously, the reason why we landed at Kurrawa Terrace is because the city's already invested money in the Kurrawa deck for this specific purpose. It is a unique location, but we were just testing the community if they would like to see these opportunities at other locations as well.
Okay. My second question just goes around, and I just want to make an observation too before I ask the question. I did attend the beach club to check it out for myself, and I had probably mixed reactions, and it probably goes to a lot of the survey results where people brought up things like back of office, the shipping containers, the fencing, that was a little bit offensive, and certainly to people who are just going to the park area. Also the fact that the cabanas, you had to pay for the cabanas and they got the beach view and all that stuff. So I'd sort of agree with all that. I just wondered if with the DA process, would that eliminate some of those concerns like fencing, like the infrastructure, the temporary infrastructure that was around the beach club? Because it didn't look good, and I must say that I found it quite offensive as well.
Through the chair, absolutely. All that information is going to our planning consultant, but also, obviously, and Roger can answer, there would be, a DA would be considering that feedback as well.
Through you, Madam Chair, most definitely those are definite issues that we would tackle if we were to assess an application.
So just one more bonus question. So if that's the case, a DA gets lodged and you're looking at more permanent infrastructure, we're still talking about a 3-year trial. So how does that actually work? Do they remove, if we approve more permanent infrastructure and that has to be removed after 3 years, if we deem the trial doesn't work, it's a little bit problematic.
Through the chair, some of the opportunities might be simple landscaping solutions to actually make that, you know, provide a buffer to that back of house. That would be permanent type improvements. The other improvements might be fencing that can be purpose built, that can be brought in and actually placed in and then taken out as required to support the event. So there's those opportunities. We haven't, obviously the feedback's gone to the planning consultant and they'll come back.
I just want to just let you know one more observation. On the day that I attended the beach club, I actually went into Currow Surf Club. It was packed to the hilt.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Now I'm going to go to Councillor Caldwell and then Councillor Gates.
Thank you. Sorry, who's the planning consultant that's been appointed?
The planning consultant is Place Design.
That cuts me out.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I mean that sincerely.
No, I know. Well, I think it's better that we ask.
Yeah, I don't have to make a declaration, but I don't have anything with me, so I'll go and get it. Carry on.
And then, so the second question is, Roger, through you, Madam Chair, in the ordinary course of events where we are the applicant, council's the applicant, we would outsource the assessment process also. So what's your intention with the assessment of any application that's lodged?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's my, I suppose, experience for these sort of applications that we would farm out the planning side of the matter to an independent planning consultant who would write a report.
Yep.
And that report we would then bring back to the City Planning Committee.
Yeah, that's good. So that was the first question. The second question relates to this beach club use and related uses, which Councillor Vorster touched on earlier. So beach club is not a use, like it's not an actual use, right?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, beach club is not a use. The closest use, and I know it's not ideal, the closest use is actually hotel. I don't particularly like it, but because I suppose the primary activity is the serving of alcohol, we have no choice. It becomes a hotel. Yeah. Just out of interest, if they didn't serve alcohol, we could actually define the use as food and drink outlet. Yes. But because it's so yeah, that's okay. It is hotel.
So my preference would be that, and so there's two things here. We've got Currow Terrace, which I thought related to basically the concrete pad only. Now, this application actually also relates to the beach area as well. Is that correct?
So through the chair, if you go onto our events website that actually has the Currow Terrace, it denotes the profile beach area. Yeah. It denotes the hard stand and some park area as well. That's what's called the Currow Terrace when you actually go for an event application.
As we internally define it, includes some beach area.
That's correct.
Sand, like sand.
It's about 800 square metres of sand.
Okay. So I don't like the idea of us trying to solve all of these other approval problems at the same time, which is what it looks like to me, that we're trying to pick up too many other incidental uses. Like when you talked about, I don't know, kids' entertainment or whatever it was, or a show or a car reveal or whatever, like all of those things would fit within a temporary use, right? So I actually don't think, if we start dealing with a DA that talks about the revealing of a car or a Wiggles concert, we are never going to be able to assess that DA and get it out the door quick enough for summer 2032. So I really personally think we should absolutely just narrow the scope to say the material change of use to facilitate our beach club under whatever definitions are required to achieve that. So, Councillor Vorster, I would be looking for some changes to 3, because I'm really...
So I've said here that the Chief Executive Officer is authorised to make a development application for a material change of use for a beach club use, and only those required ancillary uses. Because it could be that we need some other land use in order to support the hotel. But those other uses can only be brought in if they support the hotel and not because they provide anything else. That sound all right?
Yes, yeah. I just think we're going to be way too scattergun. And all of those other things we can do there, just in the current scenario anyway. So I actually genuinely think that the planning approval process is key, because we can deal with impacts, we can deal with visual amenity, we can deal with noise, and all of those things that we would ordinarily deal with, just like we did with the Kurrawa Surf Club itself, we would then have to put it through the rigorous assessment process to get the DA assessed. So I think that's actually key. I think it's very sensible, Councillor Vorster, I'm sure you've got this in here, that the report ultimately comes to council for the decision to be made, not under a delegated approval. Which I think in removing 6, I think we've probably gone a long way to addressing those concerns, because there was a real risk on my reading of it that we would be signing off on this today and we would never see it ever again. And I don't think that's what the community expects of us. Whether you're for it or against it, I think no one can be critical of a rigorous process to make sure that if it is approved, that it's done as best it possibly can be. I likewise, Councillor Vorster, thought that the word beach club should be swapped out with hospitality or food and beverage operator, to make sure that, and that ultimately at the end of that paragraph it should say, and that those options be the subject of a future report, because I'm also interested in how we deal with local procurement and our normal gates for getting local business uplifts and things like that. So I don't know what the intention is, but I would like those things to come back.
So, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Caldwell, what I'm just drafting up here fleshes out some of those on Part 4, which is the new, well, Part 5, I should say, that the Chief Executive Officer investigate options, that this process adhere to the highest probity and procurement standards, and that any final decision to appoint an operator be brought to full council for decision.
Would you shorten the term?
So just in relation to the term, if it's 3 lots of 6-month windows, I think it's actually going to provide the best financial offset capacity for us to go to the market with that as a fundamental package offering. Because what we didn't talk about is what the income might be when we go through this procurement process. Completely speculating, but a business might be prepared to bump in the stuff and pay X amount of dollars in rent for 3 years, and that actually there will be not just the economic benefits of this, but we may actually be able to then drive that money being reinvested to offset the costs to council and then deliver better things. So, you know, I think the 3 years fits neatly enough for me.
Councillor Caldwell.
This just a general comment. Disappointed to see that in the coordination and consultation piece there was no reference to any planning person mentioned. I understand Roger has turned up with his short sleeves and that's good, but to me, yes, he was consulted.
Through the chair, so we did have a number of meetings with EP&E, but because they were going to be the assessment manager, we did instead engage legal services to help us with the report. And that was agreed beforehand.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's all my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Caldwell. And I'm going, sorry, Councillor Owen-Jones.
Caldwell, in regards to the 6-month periods, 3 6-month periods,
Do
is
you
it?
think it's important I make my declaration?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, sorry to
Donna,
interrupt.
I'm sorry, but I actually really wanted to know that so that it's on the public.
Yeah.
And I support that, Councillor Caldwell, 100%. In fact, I want to mention that most of the committees now, because of the changes to legislation, make sure that if consultants are involved, they're mentioned in the report or in the introduction, because I'm in breach every time I participate. I hadn't spoken or contributed at all today, and I'm grateful that I didn't know that there had been a planning consultant appointed by council. So if you could just take that on board, where consultants are employed by council, it would be really helpful to me to know about it if it could be listed in.
It's a good point, Councillor Gates. We'll make sure from now on all of the TI committee reports clearly identify at the beginning.
Thank you so much.
Who the consultants are.
And place design are a favourite of council, I've noticed in recent weeks. So yeah, it's often that group, and they contributed to my election campaigns in 2011 and 2014, as well as 2016, although that was refunded in full. But I am seeking permission to remain in the room. I've had no contact with the consultants about this issue, but given that it affects the future of Gold Coast in terms of tourism, I would like to stay in the room and participate if my colleagues believe I should.
I'm happy to move that Councillor Gates should participate in the decision despite the conflict, because the public interest is served by her contribution to the decision, and that outweighs any perceived conflict that may have arisen from the donations that were made many years ago.
And I'm happy to second that, Councillor Caldwell. Do I need to catch up, or are we there? I can't see the screen. Councillor Caldwell, are you happy with that wording that's up there?
Yes, I am.
All right. So that's moved by Councillor Caldwell, seconded by myself. Councillors, all those in favour? Division. So that's Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Brooke Patterson, Councillor Herman Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young. All those against? Councillor Peter Young. All those. So that's carried. All right. And noting that Councillor Gates did not vote. So, Councillor Gates, I'll go to you for your questions now.
I simply wanted to support an extension of the trial because I booked to go to the beach trial when we had that terrible weather, and on more than one occasion I cancelled because it was so wet. And so I'm not confident that we've got a thorough assessment of what the outcomes may be. I would like to be certain, because this is a big decision for the council, and it is a change, if supported, to what has been accepted on the Gold Coast previously. And so I think it's really important that we are thoroughly cognisant with all aspects of it before we make the final decision.
Thank you, Councillor Gates. And I'm going to go to Councillor Vorster now. Are you...
Yes, so, Madam Chair, I'm happy to, I suppose, suggest some new words.
Yes.
With your permission and your leave, what I might do is just read them out, just in case anything's been missed. We can include it, and then I can forward it to the Minutes Secretary to support a debate. Is that all right? Yep. So, councillors, this is actually quite structurally different to what's been proposed by city officers. And it reads as follows. 1, that council notes the content of the report and stakeholder and community feedback from the Beach Club trial that was held at the Kurrawa Terrace, being the hardstand area, limited parkland and adjacent beach area, between 1 December 2021 and 14 March 2022.
Can I just hold you there? So are we happy, councillors, for that number 1?
So, and they had a roped off area, and that's all we can imagine.
Yep.
I'm not expecting it to be any
No.
bigger. There's a council definition.
Yeah. So I put.
But that's not transparent to the community what Curraway Terrace means.
Yes.
So I think there's two things. I think the part of the beach isn't actually maybe defined in that Curraway Terrace. So I think
I think Darren said it is.
Is it 800 square?
Through the chair. So when anybody goes onto the council website, there is actually a clear map that denotes what the Curraway Terrace is and that space to be activated.
was that reflected in what the trial that we've just had? Did they occupy all of that space or more?
Through the chair, that's correct. They actually took that whole space.
Yeah, thank you.
So I've just changed the words being.
Thanks,
It says here, being the hard stand area, limited parkland and the immediately adjacent beach area, right? Between 1 December 2021 and 14 March 2022. Mm-hmm. Number 2 reads that council supports in principle the continuation of a beach club trial for 6 months annually over 3 years on the Curraway Terrace. Full stop. Number 3, that the Chief Executive Officer is authorised to make a development application for a material change of use for a beach club use and only those required ancillary uses on the Curraway Terrace. With a further part A, that any development application be independently prepared, referred to the Planning and Environment Committee and decided by Council. And a B, that any development application respond to the amenity, safety and aesthetic concerns raised during the initial community consultation.
Can I hold you there? Any feedback? Because I think we...
Well, can we just get some feedback from Roger as to whether that's legitimate? I mean, they probably will come up as planning, considerations anyway,
But it's our application as I understand it. So our direction to our consultants should be to only lodge a DA that responds to the feedback that was garnered as part of the consultation. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. Did you mention the assessment of the application?
So there are 2 parts. I say that the CEO is authorised to make the development application. No dramas. But it's got to be narrowed to the scope of a beach use, beach club use and nothing else. And as part of that, as a consequence of that work, we're going to end up with both the planning application and the decision. The planning application that we lodge or ask our consultants to prepare has to respond to the community feedback that has been gathered, right? And 2, when the report is finalised, it must come before committee and council for decision, rather than under a delegation.
Through you, Madam Chair, I've no concerns with the application, obviously having regard to the trial feedback. I suppose the assessment of the application and the report will be in relation to the common material of that application and submissions. So, yes, but just for...
So I just want to make it clear, I'm merely saying here that any development application, right, so here's that, so once it's finished, any development application, right, sorry, be independently prepared, so that's by our consultants, I think we're fine with that, and then be referred to council for decision. I think that's okay, right? The second part says that that development application, so the one that's prepared by our consultants, respond to the amenity, safety and aesthetic concerns raised during the initial community consultation. So the DA that we ask to, the report that we ask to be drafted has to respond to the consultation results we've received to date. That will then trigger a public notification which will invite submissions. Officers will respond to those submissions, and then once they've settled on a position and have a final report, that go to committee for decision. Yeah?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I have no concerns with that process.
All right. Then it goes on to a 4.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Vorster, so the Chair paused to ask if we had any questions. And
I'm sorry.
And on 2, where you say a beach club trial for 6 months annually over 3 years. So the first trial was between the 1st of December and the 14th of March. What are you imagining? Are you imagining November through to April, including mobilisation and demobilisation of the?
Look, I tend not to be too prescriptive on this because, and I'm happy to be guided by the committee, of course, but my sense of it is that perhaps the operator wants to try a winter activation. Maybe there's a use there, or an autumn thing. I don't know. I'd prefer to give them the flexibility over 3 years to see where the greatest opportunity is. And it may be that it's not during peak season when it's in conflict with the interests of the other operators.
So I suppose my thought was around other event. The city invested a lot of money ultimately building an event space, and if we're going to trial it for a 3-year period and we talk of 6 months, are we imagining that there will be the opportunity for other third parties to book the space, when it's not mobilised? So, and I don't know whether or not we are better off if we're going to go down the path of indicating 3 6-month periods as opposed to 3 years, actually naming the lobster, which I think is over that period. Yep. And if the operator wants to play in a different period, then they need to have that conversation about booking it. So, and I suppose that was just that 6 months, and does it include the time that, and I know that they set up quickly last time, but we're actually after a different outcome this time.
Yeah.
And whether it should say calendar years or whether it should say financial years. Like, I think you've got to specify whether we're doing January through to December or we're doing...
I just think it would help.
Yeah, great. So, Madam Chair, through you to Darren, have you got some guidance around what you imagine, and without regard to the current operator, but just in terms of from a city officer point of view, especially with an economic development hat on, can we define a contiguous 6-month block, and should it be couched in terms of financial years or calendar years?
Through the chair, I would recommend calendar years at this time for the 3-year trial. Yep. Basically, the timeline for this, obviously, with a impact accessible DA, we're probably not going to get any activation this calendar year. It will be more than likely next calendar year. The feedback from Australia Venue Co around the timing is that they would have not typically probably had January, February due to the impact of rain. So there may be opportunities for actually the beach club operator to bump in and bump out a number of times. So it might be, March, April, May, and then it might be October, November, December. So we would like to actually give the operator the benefit to trial those, at their discretion.
All right. So, Madam Chair, what I then have is then a different 2 which reads that council supports in principle the continuation of a beach club trial for no more than 6 months annually over 3 calendar years on the Kurrawa Terrace. Yep.
Happy with that, councillors?
Right.
Right, next.
Right, yeah, it's coming, Gal. So then part 4, that the Chief Executive Officer investigate options for the appointment of an experienced hospitality operator to operate and manage the beach club for the proposed 3-year trial period, with 3 additional points under that. A, that this process be guided by the Chief Procurement Officer and adhere to the highest standards of market competition and probity. B, that ongoing community consultation be conducted by an independent accredited IAP2 firm or professional appointed by the city but at the expense of the appointed operator. And C, that the decision to appoint the successful operator be decided by council resolution. And that eliminates 6, obviously, and it eliminates the fact that we're noting it's in the city budget already, because that's superfluous. So if there's further thoughts, I can incorporate it here. Otherwise, I can email it to Sandy. We can get it up on screen. Yep. Madam Chair, if that's okay?
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thanks, Councillor Vorster.
Sandy, just to your personal address.
What we're doing now. Can I just ask a question? What's your thoughts on the that we retain the market research company, but they pay.
Yep.
Are you okay with that mechanism?
Through the chair, I guess the decision for council is, and what was that tension in the trial, is obviously the economics of the whole proposal for the beach club operator, and they, not charging any kind of cover charge in terms of competition with the other food and beverage operators in the Broadbeach area. So that's why in the report it was actually to come back with those considerations around the operator, passing that cost on to the operator in terms of managing it and undertaking the consultation works is doable. It's probably more of an overarching decision for council on what costs we are going to pass through to the operator.
So, Madam Chair, through you, I think Councillor Caldwell, I mean, the reason why I've crafted that is, number one, in response to Councillor Young's implied concern that the ratepayer is burdened by supporting the trial, and this is a gesture that we want the proponent to carry a reasonable share of their costs. And number two, it ensures that we manage that consultation process, because ultimately it will inform a change of our position, not a material commercial decision on their part. So that information, that intellectual property, the questions that are asked should be asked for by us, because they will inform our long-term policy position. And it's not around whether they need mojitos as opposed to margaritas. Both. Lychee, martini.
I have a question to pose through you to all the councillors. I wonder if there's been adequate thought or consideration of what happens to this site for the other 6 months of the year. Like, are we demanding, and is it the right time now to be specific about what we want that site to be like, look like, feel like, how it's available to the public or whatever? Because it's as if we're opening the door here, and they might have all sorts of facilities and structures there that stay for the 6 months they're not actually operating, which impedes public access. So,
Madam Chair, I think clarify something that I may have not been clear on. I think those concerns are addressed by the development application coming before council, and we have an opportunity to condition any development application to ensure that structures and impediments to public access are addressed in the actual land use decision itself, rather than in a procurement process. So we have two bites at the cherry.
yeah, I appreciate that, and I might just comment, if you don't mind, Chair, which is, I think now's the time to define that. Now's the time to say what our expectation is, so that it is captured within that DA, rather than expecting it to trickle, flow forward from the applicant, who may have no concept that we want that space available to the public.
So Madam Chair, through you, Councillor Young, we are the applicant. This is what's different from the earlier process. In the earlier process, they were seeking a permit for an event. In this instance, we are lodging a development application, and we have the ability, and we've made it quite clear, and the officers know, given this tape and reference to aesthetics, safety and what have you. I mean, if it gives you comfort, perhaps where we say, so where's the aesthetics? If we could just scroll down. There we go, sorry, B. And where is it? 3B. Sorry. Yeah, amenity, safety. So after safety, let's do a comma, and then say public access, comma, and then aesthetic concerns. And I do that, I suppose, as a gesture, Councillor Young, but my view is the best tool we have is actually with the development approval, because then anything else is a breach, right? It's a bigger stick.
So could I just clarify, Councillor Vorster, are you imagining in March, if they're not operating on site, that they will have demobilised everything off site?
No, what I'm saying is that some people may have raised concerns about public access. And, you know, like we've got to be reasonable, right? So I don't know what the market might throw up. And there's perhaps some infrastructure that they might want to invest in, which can provide a social use. So, for example, they may, and I'm just making this up, but I'm just doing it because it's an example. They might want to accommodate more live music than we've previously had. I'm just making it up. And that may require the investment of some infrastructure. So after they bump out, there may be some infrastructure left behind that we can repurpose and use. So it's not necessarily that they have to vacate the site if there are things that they could leave behind that we could continue to use.
Okay, so if it was June and it wasn't being used as a beach bar, so you could imagine on a day like today, would you imagine that, for example, there would be 3 containers that are locked up and left on site?
Absolutely not, because for me, that was one of the public access issues that was identified in the consultation, which I expect to be addressed in our DA.
Thank you.
And that was also an amenity issue for most people, was to restore it to as close as to what it was when they went onto the site.
That's right. And for example, we heard that some residents nearby were concerned about the plant or what would normally be plant, but is the top of containers and what have you. I'd expect that they'd have to tidy that up because it would, you know, it looks grotty. Yeah, and I mean, they'd want to shoot up drones and all the rest for promo vids. So anyway.
All right, now go to Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. When I first read this report, I considered that there would be some council support for it, so I was looking for ways to make this recommendation work in a way that I could support, and I was looking for similar things to what Councillor Worcester has put forward. And I respect and I agree with what Councillor Gates said, that the trial that we've had hasn't been sufficient to give us an idea. My concern, though, and the reason why I can't support this today, is because we're not seeing the wood for the trees. We need to take a step back. And the most alarming thing today, which means that I can't support this, is it's not a trial like the one we just had. This is not another trial. This takes on a completely different assessment. As soon as we have a planning assessment, our last one was a permit. Once we go through the planning process, we've just been told that state government or a private operator, that we have no reason for them to say, no, you can't come. We didn't have...
We must lawfully accept and assess a lawfully made application.
Agreed. And at the moment, we haven't set any precedent of any other planning application. As soon as we approve this, we have a precedent, and we know how hard it is that even if we in here vote against another one, that they go to court and they overturn us because they've said, hey, they said it was fine for this. So I really think, and when I asked the question before about the underlying intent, it was not that easy to come up with the answer, right? It was like, oh, because this said so. So we're talking about, this is the action today, which can result...
Chair, sorry, I'm happy to move it. If we have a seconder, then we can start debate and I can support.
Okay, thank you. So this start today by saying that we're happy to go through a planning application process. This is the start of, in 20 years, we have got commercialisation all over our beaches. And I would suggest, before we do that, we take a step back and do an assessment of whether that's something we want to do. Do a master plan of our beaches. What do we want them to look like in 20 or 25 years? We're getting into all this technical detail about this, and I have no comfort after what was presented from the trial so far. So what I'm presented, I get COVID and I get the rain, but the information that's given has been basically putting me on a track so that I vote for the next bit and the next bit. So we really need to take a step back. So I'd like to present a foreshadowed motion, if I may.
And I'm just going to give a little bit of feedback on that at the moment. I think, as pointed out by Darren during his commentary, for temporary use it's 28 days. So to give, we are in that's legislatively what we're allowed to do, 28 days. So if we're going to go any longer than 28 days, which I think is what came back to what the Deputy Mayor was saying, then to further the trial, to get more accurate data and to give the feedback that I
Agreed.
guess majority... Let me finish speaking, thank you, I'm chairing the meeting, is that coming back to what the other councillors have said, is on that trial we need to have accurate data, and from 76 days to 47 days being wet, in my view, and from what I'm hearing in the room from the other councillors, is that's not adequate time to give people in this room the ability to make a decision going forward. So if it's over the 28 days, this is our next alternative. This is what we have to pursue going forward. So just on that feedback.
Before we make that decision, what we've done so far is a trial that doesn't actually have any legal consequences. Once we do this, it has legal consequences. So what I would like before we step on this train, which basically designs what people can come and submit applications to us for the next 20 plus years, is we take a step back, we do a review, we know we get enough of them through the city team, of is this what we want our beaches to look like? What's the rush? Why don't we just do that first? Because this is a significant different thing. This changes the legal element of it.
First of all, I have a point of order that Councillor Vorster has not yet opened debate.
I thought he just did.
Apart from that, can I just have clarity that any future application is at very first point dependent upon the state giving approval for the use of the land? So it's not something like we're going to be flooded with applications if that is the legal point, that the landowner must first give consent for the application to be submitted.
No, I don't trust the state government. No.
Roger.
Through you, Madam Chair, for owner's consent, it's about who owns the land. It's our interpretation that the Kurrawa Terrace is owned by the state, so state would need to be providing owner's consent to make a properly made development permit application.
Thank you. And the point I'm making is that if anybody had any notion of putting forward another application for another parcel of land on the beachfront, they would require owner's consent. Correct? That gives me a comfort. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to Councillor Vorster to open debate.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I remember when ex-tropical cyclone Oswald struck the city, that our beaches were imperilled. And while I was only a city officer at the time, I recognise that many of my now colleagues were leading the charge to secure state and federal government funding to secure those beaches, because the view of the council then, and again I'm speaking as a former city officer responsible for helping to prosecute that argument, is that our beaches are our greatest asset. You cannot decouple the reputation of the Gold Coast and the notion of us as a family-friendly tourism destination without having healthy beaches. You simply can't. Even today, in the same meeting that deals with this trial, and it is a trial, we've considered an item that deals with beach health. And when the council was forced to go it alone to look after our beaches, to protect them for locals and for visitors, we set about developing first a 3-point plan for ocean beach protection, and then later our ocean beaches strategy. And since then, we have a surf management plan, we've got the World Surf Reserve. I could go on. To suggest that this council has not taken a keen interest in the health of our beaches, both environmentally and socially, to my mind, is a nonsense. And the suggestion that there has been no plan to guide the future of our beaches is also nonsense, because these plans actually exist. And not only do they exist, they're not sitting on a shelf gathering dust, they're the lifeblood of a huge swathe of our organisation. Now, one thing the Ocean Beaches strategy does do is talk about opportunities and meeting changing community needs. And while many people prize the unique character of our beaches and free access to the beaches, we can't be blind to the fact that many people want to enjoy them in new and unexpected ways as well. And during my time in this organisation and as a councillor, I've been delighted to support things like opera on the beach. Who would have thought that we would have world-class opera on the beach, where, by the way, alcohol is served? I didn't, but it was a bloody ripper of an event. Who would have thought that twice? Who would have thought that we would have a citywide festival, Bleach, serving alcohol on our foreshore at Burleigh and other locations? I didn't, but guess what? That also was a bloody ripper. And when we had the Commonwealth Games here on the Gold Coast and an opportunity to showcase the best view probably on this continent, guess where you found a bar?
Drink flying.
On the beach. To suggest that a beach club or beach bar, whatever you want to call it, is somehow not intrinsically a Gold Coast thing, again, is a nonsense, because we do it, we keep doing it, and it's always warmly received. Now today, we're being asked by city officers to support a 3-year trial. Is it remarkably different to a 28-day trial?
Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Bloody oath, it's different. It's completely different. But it's different in one material way. And that is, we will know more in 3 years than we will in 28 days. And at the end of the 3-year period, we will be able to make a better decision then than we could ever make today by simply saying no. City officers, to my mind, and I'm not casting aspersions here, and I don't mean to be accused of using pejoratives, I think they presented us a half-cooked report. But guess what the committee did? The committee worked diligently through that report, asked very testing questions of the city officers, and we redrafted the recommendations from start to finish. What we have before us on the screen is an opportunity to support a trial that has a better job of community consultation, gathers more data, allows us to respond to emerging community appetites, and protects the ratepayer and community interest by making sure it's the councillors who are accountable for the decision and not the bureaucracy. This motion gets the balance right and introduces a check and balance and allows us to curate the outcome every step of the way, beginning with direction to our planning consultants, in the middle involving a development application and that decision, and ultimately the decision to appoint the actual operator. Any councillor that has concerns, I believe, should support this motion, because it is a much more thorough process than was offered in the report. If you don't want to make decisions, don't support this. But if you want to make decisions with more facts along the way and checks and balances, then you have to support it. This commits us to nothing more than seeing what the opportunities are. And it certainly doesn't approve the appointment of an operator today.
Thank you for your opening debate there, Councillor Vorster. I'll go to anyone against. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of interesting points in there. So I don't disagree about that we have a very thorough beach strategy in place. I also don't disagree that the wording that you've done has just made this 1,000 times better and made it far, far tighter. But I still am so deeply concerned with what I've heard today in terms of the legal impact of this decision, which is 100% different to the impact of our last trial. Now, it's said, I totally appreciate what Councillor Gates said, that yes, it needs state government sign-off. Councillor Vorster said councillors are accountable for the decision. By making this decision today, as soon as this is put through, we are setting a precedent for the state government, whoever it is, whatever they want to do, to make that decision in the future. And we know that. We have seen precedents of applications in the past. My concern is not with a trial. My concern is I'm agnostic. I've attended a lot of beach bars in Asia and I've attended some great ones. My concern is we are taking away our power. And I don't want to do that until we have had a real think about what do we want it to look like in 20 years. Because whether we want to or not, by starting on this approach, it really does open a door for operators to engage with the state government and effectively cut council out of this in the future. And that I can't support.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, as a city, we are still very heavily reliant on tourism as a critical component and pillar of our economy, and it is absolutely critical, and all of our strategy work talks to diversifying and renewing the tourism offering. This is a gap that has been identified, and it is one that we, I think, with this resolution today, cautiously progress to investigate, test, and determine whether it's what we want as part of our tourism offering. But as I have said in this room previously, if we don't do some bold things like this or let people skydive from choppers, we will not be famous for fun. We will be boring and dull. And our tourism product will age and wither and die on the vine. And we as a city that is growing and vibrant and has energy do not want to allow that to happen, not while it's on my watch anyway. So on the basis of the work that we've done to this resolution today, I am happy to support this. I was not happy to let it run off unchecked into the sunset. I think we do need to keep a very close eye on it. To the extent that we get, if we're successful in achieving a development approval, we or an operator may never take up that use. It may not be economically viable. It might not be the right time. There might be another pandemic, whatever the case may be. So it's a step in the direction, but it is most certainly not some broad sweeping decision that is now allowing all of our beaches to be used for commercial activity. So interestingly, you know, you can make the data say whatever you want it to say. And maybe the people that went there that day and weren't going to spend any other time in Broadbeach had already factored in an extra day in their stay on the Gold Coast because they thought, we might go to the beach club that day. And in the end, that's what we're trying to achieve. More people coming to the Gold Coast, staying for longer, spending more, and then coming back more often. So if we can achieve things that sensibly utilise the best assets that we've got, that other cities that are competing with us don't have, then we should be trying to do it. So I think that the work we've done today as a committee puts a very rigorous process around how this will progress, which is absolutely correct. And on that basis, I'm very happy to support it today.
Thanks. I'll just preempt my question by saying I'm certainly recognising the good work that's occurred during the committee today in refining the proposed outcome. But my concern is about that other 6 months of the year. So the approval will be for 12 months a year. The operation will be for 6. And I don't think that, and the application is going to be tied to the 6 months. The application won't be tied to the 12. So I think there's a real tension there that's not resolved by the recommendation. The application to run the trial is for 6 months a year, but the application for the land use is for the 12. So what's happening in the other 6 is my concern. Having posed that kind of rhetorical question, perhaps I'll just say that I won't be supporting the motion before us. So I think it has come a long way. I think that's good work in trying to get some better attention to the details and the outcomes. But overall, my values here aren't encapsulated in some planning law, certainly not in Queensland, and that is that public spaces like beaches shouldn't be commercialised. That's it. You know, I don't see that that's going to be the golden egg that's going to bring people from overseas. Oh, I must go to the Gold Coast because now they've got a beach bar, or I can parachute jump. That's not going to do it. For me, it might for some other people, but I can't imagine that's going to be a big motivation for people around the world. The motivation is typically price and the hospitality you get and the beauty of the natural environment that you're able to enjoy. And we've got the beauty of the natural environment, and you don't need a beach bar, in my opinion. So I'll leave it at that because, as I say, I think my values aren't addressed by a law or responded to by a law, and I just have a strong sense of direction that any sorts of commercialisation like this is not ultimately to the benefit of the public who own that space. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor.
Clarification?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Madam Chair, when the question was put forward that it will erode our decision making and regarding state government overseeing it, we talked about, I had a dinner with the Deputy Premier last night, and we talked about various significant projects, and we talked about the call-in provision in the Act, where where if they want to do something, and with council we asked the Deputy Premier to call in, and I said the last time we did that was the dual development, and was the first time we wrote a letter and sent it in to the Deputy Premier at the time, and for the call-in, for that project to be called in. Then I went on and asked, I said, regarding our other projects, I said, even if it's your project, that means state government, I said, you would still respect council's position? And he said, I can't go verbatim, but the call-in provision is actually from your desire to have a project happen. So what your decision is in the city, they have, well, the current DP and the previous DP has no strategy to impose their will upon the city. Okay, so the statement that in doing this, it gives more leeway for state government to overrule or make decisions. I want to make it relatively clear that, well, in the past 10 years anyhow, the state governments absolutely respect the city's provision, the city's decision, notwithstanding, put aside the planning instrument. That's in their realm, in their opinion. I'm talking about Project Pacific. The second point then is not quite a clarification, but just answering the question regarding what happens the other 6 months. Well, I would say that it's an approval condition that you operate it for 6 months, and the other 6 months is to keep clean, and that it doesn't allow any other person or operator to be there, and gives it a better control that nobody can just come and set up and make something else and competitive, so that the tenure is a lot more clear and certain. But the operation is, of course, we condition that it can operate within that 6 months only. So I hope that helped answer the question regarding how that's going to be handled. And so that's the two clarification I wanted to put to you.
Thanks, Chair. I can't vote today. I'm not a member of this committee, but I wanted to suggest that the beauty of our natural environment here on the Gold Coast is precisely why I believe we should have a beach bar offering. We all know that we need to keep reinventing ourselves to remain the #1 tourism destination in Australia, and we also know that one of the major reasons that people come from overseas to visit this part of the world is our beautiful beaches. They are undoubtedly among the best in the world. And we have such a massive coastline of opportunity for people to enjoy our beaches and any type of beach activity that they want. So if they want a quiet place to go, they can find many. If they want somewhere where there's not a beach bar, there's another 54 or so kilometres that they can attend. And I'm pretty sure that many of us have attended beach bars in other parts of the world. Councillor Patterson has mentioned Asia. I myself have attended beach bars in Bali and at Mykonos. And you know, it's a unique experience in those locations, but ours is even more unique. And it's my very firm belief that the trial that we've most recently had was unfair. It was unfair in every way in terms of the opportunity for people to visit. I know that it was about 3 times that I had a booking that was cancelled, not always by me, but because of the weather. So I never actually got to experience it. And I'm concerned about the information that's presented us today in terms of making a long-term decision, because the trial was so poorly impacted by our weather system. So I'm looking very much forward to having the new information and to being able to make a totally informed decision on the way forward, with a hope that we can introduce a new offering to people who come to the Gold Coast, and one that people who don't like it don't have to attend.
I don't want to speak against. So I think Councillor Patterson's already spoken against. I'd like to speak. I just briefly want to speak in support of it, and I appreciate the work that Councillor Caldwell and Councillor Vorster did in regards to the words, and in particular around the experienced operator as opposed to the beach club operator. I think some of the feedback that all councillors have received is in regards to surf lifesaving and the proximity to Kurrawa, and I think that the potential here is for an operator of a lot of years' experience in the immediate area to also potentially submit as part of the tender process. To me, I think that makes a substantial difference than just saying beach club operator. And I think that Councillor Vorster earlier mentioned the milestone opportunities councillors have to make decisions, and then ultimately the decision that we will have to make as a council in potentially 3 or 4 years' time is what we do with the results from the pilot and from the information and the data that we receive. I went along to one of the days where the sun was out but the clouds were above us, and it was a weekday and it was relatively quiet, but I sat down at a table and there were a couple of middle-aged businessmen who walked up and sat down beside me and just started chatting, and they were from the Sunshine Coast and they couldn't believe that it hadn't been done either on the Sunshine Coast or the Gold Coast in the past, and they loved it, and in fact they said to me that they'd driven down specifically to go to it. Now I don't know if they went to anywhere else in Broadbeach that day, but I think that ultimately when you go to the beach, you go to the beach, and you don't necessarily always go into the adjacent shops. So I think that more data over time will help make inform a decision in 3 or 4 years' time in regards to where it goes from here.
So just wanted, through you to the Mayor, my understanding from our conversation before you entered the room, my concern with the state government and the control on future decisions is not one of call-in. So what was asserted, what was stated to us before is because this trial, unlike the last one, has to go through a planning application process, well, effectively we're setting a precedent of planning application. The role of the state government is, as the owner of the land, they can agree for an application to be sent to council. I know there's a lot of ifs and ifs and ifs, but what I want to look at, why I want to take a step back and do kind of an assessment of what we want our city to look like on the beaches in 20 years in terms of commercialisation, is because once this is decided, then there is a precedent there. If the state government says, sure, as the owner, I'm willing to give you operator consent for a planning application to council to consider, but we can then make a decision and we could decline it, and we know, based on numerous other applications, that that then be overturned in court. And I just think that when this was presented to us, that significant legal difference wasn't presented, and it was only brought out when Councillor Vorster shared it. If you hadn't, I wouldn't have even been aware of that. And I'm now really quite concerned. So I was really trying to work out how to alter this recommendation, but I just think it's a step too far. We are effectively handing over control once we've done this. That's my take, and I'm happy to be, you know, yeah, but that's what it looks like.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. I think we'll close debate there. We've had a long and arduous session going through it, and I'm going to go to Councillor Vorster to close. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for, I think, affording all councillors who have an interest in the future of the Gold Coast and this important community asset to actually weigh in and finesse this. So very much on behalf of, I'm sure, all committee members and visitors, thank you very much for your patience. Look, Madam Chair, I think what we really need to do, I think we all need to make this effort, is to give Councillor Patterson an assurance that earlier councils have done nothing other than look after our beaches when all other levels of government have failed us. There is no organisation on this planet more invested in its foreshore than City of Gold Coast. We build A-lines, we deliver oceanways, we build reefs, yeah? We build dive attractions. No entity on the face of Mother Earth looks after its beaches more than this one. And the suggestion that we would imperil that custodianship of such a precious asset boggles my mind, because the reality is this motion has been crafted to give us control. The officer recommendation gave the administration control. This motion gives us control. And you know why it's a better process than the one that you were happy to support last time, I think? The reason why it's a better process is it's because it requires a material change of use which has a statutory public notification and submission process and affords the community appeal rights. If you are looking for a process that protects the community interest and is more thorough than an event application, by all rights you should be throwing both hands up in the air. Because if you don't, then the precedent becomes a takeover for 28 days plus 28 days with potentially no council say. If you want a process that actually sets a benchmark for assessment and sets a benchmark for community interest, then you support this process. Because in the assessment process, we set the benchmark, and if you're concerned with precedent, which by the way doesn't exist in planning, but if you worry that it does, then you should be eagerly anticipating the opportunity to set a precedent that protects the community interest absolutely. Madam Chair, speaking more broadly, we have an obligation to protect the community and we have an obligation to protect our assets, and we have a greater obligation to make sure that our assets are working for the community. And I cannot ignore the comments by Destination Gold Coast in support of this. I cannot ignore some of the early results in the consultation, and I cannot ignore the comments of my colleagues when forming the view that absolutely we should be supporting a trial. And to any councillors that may worry, worry not, because this is a much more sophisticated process, a more transparent process, and a process that gives you the ability to set a benchmark. And if you don't vote for this, you're relying on a local law to dictate how commercialisation happens, rather than an instrument with the force of law. Thank you.
For all your input there. We'll move on to item 6.5, which is a Gold Coast Transport Strategy 2041 engagement process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, you'll recall that we put this item before you at a previous committee and we took your advice on board. Since that time, there's been a number of changes made to the consultation document, which is the draft discussion paper as attached. Mr Tilley and his officers have visited you to discuss your concerns. Mr Tilley apologises for not being here today. He's bedridden with COVID quite severely, and in fact his whole team has got COVID, so particularly the next team talking about the freight strategy, so I'll be talking to that one as well. But we do have Ben Kaspani here, who's been the project manager for the transport strategy, in case you have any questions. He's been in the anti-COVID booth the whole time in the basement, so he's designated survivor, I think you call it. Designated survivor. That's the one. So, councillors, it's there before you in the report. I'm not sure if there's anything I need to add other than that we've taken on board, again, really good feedback that you've given us through this consultation process. I believe that the document is far more fit for purpose. We've listened to your advice around singing our praises on what the current 2031 strategy has provided to the city on to date and will provide. The need for moving forward to embrace the new technologies, particularly that have been emerging, which will take us out to 2041. and understanding the need for new forces apart from just normal growth, which are impacting the city, particularly as we'll look at in the next item, Madam Chair, around the growth of freight, but across all sectors of transport. So it's very timely to open the batting with a discussion paper, which is before you, and we've also had a discussion about the method of consultation as well.
Director, have you settled on the proposed schedule or locations for those pop-up consultations with our respective communities? I know that was a feature of our discussion during our workshops.
Through you, Madam Chair. So my notes from the discussion with Matt are, I think there's going to be 11 pop-ups covering the broad geography of the city, plus a pop-up at both Griffith and Bond University, so that will be 13 in total.
Okay. And, sorry, Madam Chair, through you to the Director, between now and full council, could you just confirm whether one of those pop-ups might include Robina Town Centre? Was discussed between, I think, Councillor Tozer and myself, maybe he was there, I think he was, that Robina Town Centre is a good spot because it induces so much traffic. It'd be good to capture the travel behaviours of those people and also give Mudgeeraba residents an opportunity to do something on their doorstep.
Agreed. It's the ideal location which covers both 9 and 11 there.
Councillors, is there any other questions there? And I think we all had... You're happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor Vorster. Councillors, all those in favour? That is carried. And our final item of the day is the 10-year freight investment schedule. Now, it is on grey paper and for the local government's budget reasons. If there's any questions or any comments, thank you, Mr Mayor. Any questions?
I'd like to introduce a general business motion when we've finished.
Okay, thank you. If there's a need to go into closed at all for this, or if our councillors have read the report and we're happy for it, Councillor Owen-Jones.
At least a question that needs to be asked in close. I'm happy to move to
so
close because
you're
of
happy
the
to move to
budgetary
close? Move to close, Councillor Owen-Jones, seconded by...
I appreciate that, Councillor.
Seconded by Councillor Caldwell. All
Open.
those in favour?
Open, some would say.
We're now into close.
Here.
We're now in open. Councillors,
Item 7.1.
yeah, 7.1 moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor Vorster. All those in favour? That's carried. That's all of our scheduled items today. We'll go to Councillor Peter Young for a GB item. And
I move that a traffic engineering investigation be undertaken into the Nerang State School precinct.
I second that.
Thank you. And if I might speak to it very briefly.
yes, please.
I did discuss this with the Director before the meeting began, and hopefully I got the words right there, Director. There was a report here about a petition for a pedestrian crossing, a zebra crossing in Nerang Street, and I was happy to accept all of that and the works that are proposed. Then subsequently I became aware of the active school travel program which is being run through the Nerang State School, and the drop-off zone that they're promoting through this is directly near this proposed, or where the petitioners sought for the crossing to be installed, and which we're not doing. And I've talked with the Director about the fact that just up the street on the intersection with Ferry Street, it's a very major road. The pedestrian crossings there are signalised, but there's only 3 legs of the signals, and the 4th one is the critical one that's missing, and I think that may come out through this investigation that's being proposed through this motion. Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, councillors.
So we'll put that down. It's moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor...
I got it.
Thank you.
Moved, seconded by Councillor Orange. All those in favour?
I'm going to vote on this one too.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's carried unanimously. Is there any other general business items? Thank you, councillors.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Closed at 3:28 p.m.